All right, welcome everybody. Some people are still trickling in, but we're gonna get moving a little bit here. I'm Jo Diamond. I'm a physical therapist here at React Physical Therapy in our Deerfield location. And today I have an extra special type of webinar for you. I've actually asked two of my friends and running teammates to come join me. They're both members of the medical field as well, and they also work with athletes and runners. So today I have Shaheen and Lydia joining me. I'm gonna let them give a more thorough introduction in a moment here, but the reason we wanted to do this is because runners are complicated people. Just like anybody, really, there's not just one thing that matters when we're injured and to our health, right? So a lot of times I get questions that I can't necessarily answer, and I wanted to bring some of my friends in to help us out with that. So go ahead and introduce yourselves for me a little more in detail.
Okay, I'm Shaheen Brankowski. Like Jo said, I'm a running teammate. I'm also a licensed professional counselor and a mental performance consultant. Currently I'm doing more counseling work through my practice at Graceful Growth Counseling and working with a very diverse population. I also work with athletes doing mental skills training, working through mental blocks, working through thought processes when it comes to competition and practice, and making sure that they're able to compete to the best of their ability.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lydia Nader. As Jo said, I am a registered dietitian nutritionist who has worked with athletes, primarily runners and endurance athletes for the past 4 years here in the Chicagoland area. And I primarily focus on specialty of female athletes, injury and recovery rehab, as well as just general performance nutrition and using your food to help reach your goals. So I'm excited to share some tips and tricks with you guys tonight.
Thank you. So this is our panel for you today. Just to recap, now that some more people have joined, throughout this, we're gonna have times to ask questions. The way you can do that is in the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Everybody's muted, so we can't hear you. So that's where you're gonna have to put your questions for us. And we'll be checking regularly. For a moment here, I'm gonna pull up, is this working? Here we go. Can you all see this? So we're going to talk about, and we're going to attack this from a few different angles. Uh-oh. Okay, here we go. So again, here are your panelists. This is the order of things that we're going to do here. We're going to start with Shaheen Brankowski talking about mental aspects of injury and how to bounce back. We'll pause for a few minutes. This is where you can get all your questions in. We'll check the chats. She'll address your questions. And then we'll move on to Lydia talking about stop it before it happens, preventing injury using nutrition. Again, we'll stop. You can get your specific questions to Lydia, and then we'll move on. Same thing with me. I'll talk about some non-running ways that you can improve your running and prevent injuries. And then again, we'll have time for questions at the end. We'll have a little demo for you, and that will be all. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of here and pass it on to
All right, thanks, Jo. Okay, let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so kind of just a little overview of what I'll be talking about when it comes to the mental aspects of injury. I'm kind of just going to go through just some physical or psychological implications on how injuries happen, psychological reactions to injury, and how to become a champion in your own recovery process, and using your own mental game in conjunction with the recovery process. So let me do this here. Okay, so I thought it would be a good idea to maybe just talk about how injury happens in relation to stress, because there's stressful situations that might be going on that causes us to get injured. Injuries don't just magically happen. They kind of either build up over time, or there's a situation that puts us in a position to get injured. So just in this model here, on the left of your screen, there's a box that says potentially stressful athletic situation. So that could mean a couple of things. In relation to running, that could mean the environment that you're training in or the environment that you're about to race in. As runners, we race in all different kinds of environments and conditions, whether it's rainy or windy or snowing, sometimes hail, sometimes less than ideal conditions. Maybe less than ideal conditions might also mean really sunny and hot. So everyone has their different ways they like to train, different conditions they like to race in. Maybe it's the type of workout that you're perceiving as potentially stressful. Maybe you're having to do a bunch of 800s that you're not really in for the day, and it's just stressing you out just thinking about it. Maybe you're already kind of dealing with a pre-existing injury that's just nagging, and it's really easy for us as runners, because we just want to push through things, that we kind of just gloss over it and just say it's just a minor twinge, it's not a big deal, I can get through it. I think that word potentially at the top of it is important, because it depends on how one might perceive that stressful situation. And that's where we go into the stress response, where in cognitive appraisal, it's how as an athlete you are viewing and assessing that situation. Sometimes we might see it as a challenge and something that we can rise to, and sometimes we might see it as a threatening situation and something that we might not be able to meet the demands for. And along with that, there's psychological and attentional changes, and there's a two-way arrow there to kind of represent those two things influencing each other. So if we're in a situation where we don't feel like we can handle it, physiologically, we might have increased muscle tension, we might have increased breathing, increased heart rate. In terms of attentional changes, we might start to get tunnel vision and not be able to focus on our peripherals. So if we're hyper-focused on the fact that it's rainy and that we have an injury or a minor twinge going on, we might be hyper-focused on those things that we might not even be paying attention to the environment around us. So if we're running along on a trail and there's a hole, fall into that hole, sprain an ankle, get injured. And it's hard to take our focus away from other things when that is taking up space. And so those two things kind of go hand in hand, along with the boxes at the top, which kind of help or hinder how you might deal with that stress response. So in terms of history of stressors, if we have a lot of life changes going on, like we're moving, we're dealing with relationship issues, lifestyle changes, all of those things kind of go into that stress response and how we're handling those. In terms of coping resources, if we don't have the strategies to cope with the stress, it might make it harder to overcome it, might make it difficult to be able to meet the demands of what the situation is asking of us. In terms of personality, if we're not able to be flexible with the situation, that might also cause us to stress out more and could potentially lead to injury. At the bottom, for psychological skills interventions, that's something that as athletes we might have in terms of like goal setting, being able to relax ourselves and how much we have of those and are able to tap into that and use it could help with that stress response and decrease it. But if we don't have those skills to be able to use to lessen the stress response, then that can also heighten things and lead to injury. Oops. So in terms of psychological reactions to athletic injury, obviously getting injured sucks. It's not fun, especially in the moments that it happens, the immediate moment that it happens. So in the period immediately following an injury is characterized by the greatest emotional response and reactivity. There's a lot of thoughts that flood in to our brain and our thought process. And I have a couple examples just to the right of your screen that maybe some of you might resonate with. There's probably a bunch that I didn't tap into. And it's hard to deal with an injury when it sidelines us either unexpectedly or is something that has built up. In terms of emotional responses that come with injury, a couple I have listed there too. We might feel shock, disappointment, anger, helplessness, uncertainty for what this might mean for training in the future, uncertainty for what that holds for racing, might feel guilt, fear, denial, and anxiety, depression. I put relief in there too, and I think that's an important one to touch on as well, especially if we have anyone out there that is a high school runner or is on a cross-country team, or is in a team situation and might be experiencing burnout. Sometimes that can be a sign of relief to maybe thinking, well, maybe this is a good time to take a break from my sport. And it sounds like a sad way of thinking about it, but it's not. And I'd like to believe that it's maybe not an uncommon thought to have. If you're feeling overtrained, if something in your training isn't working for you, if you're starting to feel out of sorts with the sport. So it's not an uncommon emotion to experience. And some other psychological reactions to dealing with an injury, injury relevant information processing. So just trying to understand what the injury is about, trying to learn more information. How did it happen? How is this going to affect the rest of my running career? Emotional upheaval and reactive behavior. Sounds like pretty intense language, but reactions happen where how we respond to a situation is normal, especially when it is either sidelining something important to us and something important to our identity, identity loss. So when thinking about injury, it's also important to kind of think about, if anyone out there is familiar with the stages of grief, it's kind of similar to that. So we might experience denial that we're hurt. So maybe having thoughts of, oh, this is nothing, I'll be back to running in a week. When it actually might be something kind of serious and might require some more time off. Like I touched on with emotions, you might experience anger, might eventually get to a place of acceptance, but it might take some time to get there. And those stages aren't linear. There's a possibility of bouncing back from stage to stage. But it does feel like a part of you might be missing for a bit if you can't be doing what you were used to doing in your training program. Might develop a lack of confidence, and then eventually getting into a positive and helpful outlook with coping, kind of as we work through the psychological aspects of that. Okay, so becoming a champion in your recovery process. So as runners, again, like there are times that we're really good at pushing through and we have the psychological skills it takes to meet goals and to be able to push ourselves. And so those same goals that you can use for running, you can take to your recovery process in injury. Acknowledging the fact that, maybe in working through rehab and working through recovery may not be as fun as and exciting as getting a workout in or running a race. So it takes some reframing and some changing of mindset to get there. So just a couple of key things to think about when you're going through recovery. So at the top here, I have understanding and gaining knowledge on your injury with the help of professionals. That's an important piece too, because it decreases some of the anxiety and uncertainty with what you're dealing with. And so when you're able to understand how to manage your recovery process, it can help with moving forward. It can help with developing a plan. It can help with goals, and getting you back to where you want to be, and to continue. And this point here of taking a village, it takes a village. It takes a village to raise any athlete, and I'm a full believer of that. It takes coaches, it takes teammates, it takes family members, it takes a lot of people to get one athlete to where they need to be. And that's no different with injury recovery. And it still takes those same people plus a holistic approach with physical therapists, doctors, RDNs, and sports psychology consultants, if you can swing it. It's nice to have all of those people in your court to help guide. I feel like is a beneficial key to injury recovery. Patience is key. It would be nice if Rome was built in a day and could make injury recovery happen like that, and we can get back to doing the things we love. But patience is something that will ultimately get you far and above to where you want to be with your training goals, and also helps develop resilience. And training is never a linear process. There's always setbacks. I don't think recovery is any different than that. And so we know what can come. We know that there's frustration and setbacks, but there's also an opportunity to bounce back from that. So lots of parallels. Coping resources and pain management, that kind of goes back to kind of working with the team of people you have to develop ways to manage pain. And then also coping resources kind of encompasses everything else that comes after in this list. Productive self-talk and thought reframing. So we're used to, I think most of us are used to hearing like positive self-talk and thought reframing. I try and veer away from like the positive and negative self-talk just because I think sometimes there's a connotation with positive, like you only have to be happy and you only have to have joy when you're doing this. And sometimes there's parts of this that isn't necessarily like happy and joyful, but using reframing of thoughts and self-talk in a way that's going to work for you. So what might work for you might not work for someone else. And so it's important to be able to find what that is and kind of explore that with yourself, talk to teammates about it, talk through it with other support systems, whether that's your therapist, physical therapist, whether that's you working with a mental performance consultant, a counselor, and just finding ways to structure that for you to be successful. And then we have relaxation techniques. So whether that's progressive muscle relaxation, which I'll kind of talk about in the next slide, I'll leave you guys with a little exercise that you can have to try on your own, and then breathing techniques. So it's really easy to get tense and just not be able to function fluidly when we're frustrated, when we're under a lot of stress. And so when we're going through this injury recovery process, it's a lot of things can happen easier when we can relax our body. So using those can be helpful. Goal setting, again, with the help of your physical therapist, with anyone who's helping you through the recovery process, you'll have goals, just like we have running goals, whether that's time-based, whether that's performance-based, whether that's just trying to get out and going on a run. We have goals here too, to try and get you back to baseline and get you back to competing. Healing, visualization, and performance imagery. Personally, that's my favorite, and there's a lot of research that talks about how imagery and recovery go hand in hand in terms of muscle activation and trying to visualize what part of your body is trying to heal and what that looks like moving successfully, and how you can look moving forward, going back into training and going back into racing and competing. And so seeing is believing, truly. It helps with muscle activation, and while it can't replace the actual movement, it's definitely helpful in conjunction with the recovery process. And then lastly, mindfulness. Mindfulness techniques are very helpful. Kind of going back to what I was talking about with the connotation of positive and negative, we don't have to be just one emotion all the time, and just kind of checking in to where you are and tuning in to being present. If there might be days where you're really just not feeling great and you might just have to push through it, checking in with yourself and asking yourself, how am I going to do that? What can I give myself today to get me to where I want to be? And so just kind of asking yourself processing questions, and also checking in with where you are to see how we can get to where we want to be. So lastly, there's a lot on this activity that I have here, but I'm leaving you with a progressive muscle relaxation. And basically how it works is you focus on one part of your body at a time. This also can be in conjunction with mindfulness, developing mindfulness skills, in that you have to focus on one body part at a time, but also kind of centering yourself and tuning in to where maybe there's tension in your body, relaxing one part of your body as you tense another. By the end of it, the goal is that you feel completely relaxed. It takes practice. You might not feel super relaxed the first time you do it, but it is a helpful tool to use if you are feeling really tense. Obviously, if you're going through an injury, check with your medical team first to see if this is something that you're able to do. If the instruction asks to tense a part of your body where there's an injury, maybe don't do that. But everything else should be fine. Make sure when you do it, you're in a space where there's limited distractions, where you're able to kind of just center yourself and just tune in. Okay. So that is all I have. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to send them in the chat box.
I have a question for you about that last slide, the progressive relaxation.
Sure.
When would you do it? Or when do you recommend your athletes to do it?
Sure. So it's something that is good to practice something good to practice as you're getting ready to practice, like getting ready for a training run or getting ready for a really tough workout. And I harp on that because I don't want the first time that my athletes do it is at like a race or at a competition, because it kind of throws off their whole warm-up routine or whatever pre-race or pre-competition routine that they have. So as you're getting ready to go on your run, or you're getting ready to do your workout and you're warming up, maybe pre-warm up would be a really good time to do that.
Okay. If nobody else has questions right now, you can always ask questions later too, but we will move on to Lydia Nader here. Thanks, Shaheen.
Thank you, guys.
Awesome. I will say personally what I took away from that presentation was the productive self-talk. I love that reframing of even that self-talk thing, because as a dietitian, I talk to a lot of people about reframing thoughts, but that is and self-talk, and so I love that. And that's my personal takeaway. So I hope other people had a big takeaway from that. So thank you guys so much for joining tonight. I'm excited to share and build off of that last presentation and just talk to you more about what you can do with your nutrition to not only heal when an injury happens, but also prevention of that actual injury, because we can use our nutrition to truly help prevent injury from happening. So if you're someone here today that has struggled with frequent injuries, you're frustrated, I've seen you as a runner before, I've seen this happen, and oftentimes nutrition is one of the key steps that's missing throughout the process. So tonight I'm going to go through 5 steps or 5 tips of things you can do to help prevent injury. And fun little secret, they're also the 5 tips you can do when you have an injury and how to adapt with your injury. So we're going to kind of do a little bit of a timeline here of those tips. So I'm going to start off with sharing a very popular kind of handout or social media thing that I did share before. So let me just get that pulled up here for you guys. Awesome. Okay. So can you guys see this? Buckets of energy. Are you filling them both up? This is tip number 1. So if you're taking notes, I do encourage it. But tip number 1 is don't underconsume your calories. One of the biggest things I see when I'm working with athletes and runners is that oftentimes a frequent injury is happening because there's not enough energy, i.e. calories, being consumed in your everyday diet. You're maybe filling up bucket number 1 here. So see how these are your biological functions, your heart pumping, your breathing, your muscles just doing their everyday thing, not necessarily powering you forward on a run. Healing, fighting any inflammation, and much, much more when it comes to the biological performance or biological functions. And sometimes we're just consuming enough calories to support this, and we're not consuming enough to really find that performance need. So when we're talking about prevention of injury, if we want to have that higher performance, we want to run faster, we want to run further, we have to make sure that our calorie needs and our intake of food is truly meeting both bucket 1 and bucket 2 to help prevent that injury. If we're just meeting bucket 1, we put ourselves at a higher risk of creating injury. Now, how do you know how many calories you should be consuming? And you can get really scientific and do all the calculations and do all the stuff. It doesn't have to be that complicated though. You can really truly tell based off of listening and becoming in tune with your body and being able to tell if you wake up in the morning and you're hungry, you might need to be consuming a little bit more. Maybe you didn't consume enough after a workout the day before. If you are hungry in the middle of the day, it's your body saying, hey, give me some calories. I need some food. I need some energy. You're asking a lot of me, not just for my heart to pump, but also to run faster, run further, all of those different things. So when your body's talking to you in cravings and in hunger, it's listen to it. That's how you can know how much energy you have without getting the specific numbers. So that is the first tip, is make sure that you're consuming enough calories to prevent injury. Tip number 2 is protein needs. Protein, protein, protein. This is one of the biggest things I tell athletes and runners, is you have to make sure that if you want to prevent and or heal from an injury or surgery, I will say that too, surgery, it's protein. You need to make sure you're consuming enough protein. And as runners, we oftentimes see that you're not consuming enough protein in your diet. And you might say, well, like, does that mean I have to go on this like specific diet and I have to lower other things? Not at all. It can be as simple as just making sure you increase your protein portions at dinner time or at breakfast time. Simple tips for protein needs is, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, nuts, seeds, chicken, turkey. I'm not going to say beef is bad, because I think red meat here and there can be a great source of iron as well, which can also be helpful for prevention of injury. So there's many different sources of protein, both animal and plant-based, and you can get all of your nutritional needs from both sources. So that's 100% possible. You don't have to be on a specific diet. Whenever I recommend protein needs for individuals, I will say a great rule of thumb to help prevent injury as an endurance athlete, so that's all you guys here today, it's 1 gram of protein per body weight. And this is helpful for you to really make sure that you're preserving muscle mass and being able to build muscle mass too, because truly to be able to run further and run faster, muscles working more, and to recover properly, it does come down to this protein needs. Which leads me into my third recommendation, which is refuel. If you truly want to prevent injury, you need to make sure you're refueling after your workouts. Now, what do I mean by this? I mean anything that is a workout that is more than, if you hear running around feet, everybody, that's a little puppy that we have who is running around. If you hear squeaky toys, that's him too. So nice little noise in the background. But really it's about that refuel. And when I talk about refuel, I mean having a protein and carbohydrate rich snack or meal after a workout within 45 minutes of finishing that workout. And a workout can be a long run, a tempo run, a speed workout. It doesn't always have to be an easy run, but if you are finding that you're under consuming those calories like we talked about in tip number 1, then the refuel after an easy run could help you get to where you need to be. So that's totally fine to be able to refuel after every single type of workout. And it's really going to help with prevention of muscle loss and building muscle as well, which helps you just get stronger. And the more muscle, the less chances of injuries oftentimes. So you're healing up and prevention of that injury. So tip number 4 for you guys is anti-inflammatory foods. Now I could talk forever just about anti-inflammatory foods, but I'll keep it short and sweet for you guys tonight. In terms of anti-inflammatory foods, you may have heard of these. This consists of including healthy fats like omega-3s that can be coming from your fatty fish like salmon or tuna. It can also come from plant-based sources like chia seeds, flax seeds, walnuts. So there's many different sources of omega-3s, and these are really helpful for prevention of injury because we see fats as a great protector of our bodies. So being able to protect your body. And also they can help heal your body. So if we talk about anti-inflammatory foods, you can still be able to focus on that. So definitely making sure that you are getting omega-3s throughout your diet. This can maybe be your, maybe be through fish oils, so some supplements there, which I don't want to dive too much into that, but fish oils is an option there, or you can focus in on getting those foods that I mentioned before. I'm going to share this wonderful little graphic that is put out by Harvard Health, which I do use them a lot when working with individuals. Now you see these are foods that fight inflammation. So we have anti-inflammatory foods, those fatty fish, those nuts, olive oil, leafy greens, things like avocados, fruits like berries, oranges, cherries. A specific food that I know is really helpful for helping prevent injury, decrease inflammation, as well as recovery. So if you're in an injury state already and trying to get back to performance and heal, tart cherry juice. You might not have a lot of fruit juice oftentimes, but tart cherry juice is a great anti-inflammatory drink to have in your routine as you're recovering. So these are some of your anti-inflammatory rich foods. And then we see there, these are the inflammatory foods. You know, we can't necessarily talk about anti-inflammatory if we're not talking about what's maybe more inflammatory. So your fried foods, your more sugary beverages like sodas, your refined carbohydrates, your lard or things like that. Now, grass-fed butter, totally okay to still have, as grass-fed beef and products in the grass-fed area can be actually rich in omega-3s. So those are totally fine. I get that question a lot. And then we also have processed meats. So if we're thinking about great combinations of anti-inflammatory foods with the refuel that we talked about before, we can think about maybe adding some berries to a Greek yogurt that has some granola on top. That's my personal favorite all the time for a refuel. You can also look at doing, if your refuel is actual dinner or it's lunch, maybe it's cooking with olive oil and you have a salad on the side, or you have some spinach or kale or something like that, and you have some salmon. One of my favorite dishes for recovery and prevention of injury is truly a salmon, like baked salmon with some bell peppers, really rich in vitamin C, which is a nutrient we know that's really crucial for the production of collagen, which it helps with muscle health and healing. So having plenty of vitamin C, if you see all those fruits that are listed there, all rich in vitamin C. So there's a reason they're on this list. Having salmon with some bell peppers, with some pineapple, it's delicious, guys. I also add a little bit of quinoa, the perfect type of recovery dinner. So trying to focus primarily on those recovery foods that focus entirely on anti-inflammatory. You can dive deeper into anti-inflammatory foods for sure, as I could spend an entire night just talking on that. But I want to jump to tip number 5 for you guys. And tip number 5 is truly about looking at your hydration. So you may not have even thought that I would talk about hydration here, but one of the biggest things that I see is dehydration causing injury. We sometimes don't realize this, but dehydrated muscles are more likely to experience an injury than a hydrated muscle. And you're more likely to create fatigue, your form might change. If you're dehydrated, many things can factor into potential injury if you're not hydrated. So we talk about hydration, ideally, in a day-to-day basis, you should really be getting 1 milliliter of water per pound of body weight. So making sure you're drinking plenty of water throughout your day. If it's not always water, it can be added with some electrolytes. As we know, electrolytes play a really crucial role in actual hydration, because a factor we sometimes see is overhydration in runners, because we say, oh, you hear someone like me say, drink water, and you go and you just chug a bunch of water. And then you're like, I'm running to the bathroom, my pee is clear, all these different things. Well, we need to add in that extra step of hydration, and that's electrolytes. Electrolytes are sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and chloride. These are 5 of the most crucial electrolytes, and we sweat these out. We need these. Don't be scared of sodium. I know the public health, everybody says, oh, watch the sodium, do low sodium. We as runners, do not worry about that. You are fine. You can have sodium, even if you, like I have a client who has issues with, has a history of a heart condition, and he still needs plenty of sodium. So you know what? He's doing more than the recommendation of sodium, and he's doing perfectly fine. So you don't need to be afraid of sodium. You actually need sodium and potassium to absorb the water. This will eliminate running to the bathroom all the time. This will allow for your body to actually absorb the water, truly hydrate yourself and prevent that injury. So a lot of people and a lot of runners, I actually recommend that even if you don't go for a run on a day, or maybe it's a rest day, still include some electrolyte replenishment, whether it be your Noon, your Liquid IV, your SOS hydration, your Scratch. There's so many different products out there, and whatever works for you in your day-to-day can be really beneficial. So I do recommend hydrating throughout your day with water and adding some electrolytes. So those are my 5 tips for prevention of injury. And like I said, these are also really great tips for helping you to bounce back from an injury. So making sure that you take these same things. Don't underconsume your calories. A big trigger factor that I see a lot of runners is they get injured and they immediately pull back on all the food they're consuming. And they say, well, the fear of gaining weight. And this fear is a very real fear, but also your body, remember those buckets? It needs calories to heal itself. It needs calories to reduce inflammation, which inflammation is what's going on in an injury. It's going on after a surgery. You need calories to help your body do what it was made to do, which is heal itself. So making sure you're not under consuming calories in an injury. Making sure you're having plenty of protein to support the healing process. Making sure that you're refueling. After you go to your physical therapy, you should still be refueling with some protein at least. Maybe it's a snack, maybe it's not a meal, maybe it's not like what you would do after a long run or a tempo run, but it's still crucial because you're working with your physical therapist. You need to have some sort of refueling plan, even in an injury state. And also making sure to have plenty of anti-inflammatory foods. Like I was saying, inflammation is what's going on in your body during an injury. You have to be able to focus in on those anti-inflammatory foods. And a fun fact is you increase those omega-3s, you're less hungry. The more fats you get in, the less hungry you're gonna feel, the more satisfied you're typically gonna feel in your diet. And number 5, a hydrated muscle and a hydrated body recovers so much faster during an injury or post-surgery than dehydration. Inflammation thrives in dehydrated bodies, so hydrate yourself. And you may hear this a lot during the summer, and as we're getting into the colder months, you may start to forget about hydration, but it's just as crucial. You can get dehydrated even in these colder months. You may not realize it, but focusing in on that hydration can be crucial. So I want to share one last little slide here for you guys, just as going over those tips and everything with you, but this is adapting your nutrition for that injury recovery. And this is all those things we kind of just talked about, but there's a few added things in here. So focusing in on lean protein, we just talked about that. That can be chicken, tofu, lean beef. Getting in that 1 gram per pound of body weight will help you to still recover. That's one thing that shouldn't change. If you go from full force training to injury, your protein should stay the same. If you want a little bit more in the injury state, no harm done. That can be a great thing to help improve your recovery. You also want to maybe replace some of your starches and your grains with some veggies and fruits to get more antioxidants, to get more minerals that are going to be helpful, like zinc, like magnesium. Those sorts of things are going to really help heal the body. Those are crucial nutrients for healing, including those omega-3 rich foods, whether they be plant-based or animal-based. And finally, incorporating foods that are rich in calcium and vitamin D. So this can be from dairy, this can be from broccoli. Sun exposure is a great thing. Now I know we're getting into the colder months, so it might not be as possible to get that sun exposure. But I do oftentimes, if you are someone who deals with frequent bone injury issues, during the winter months, I do recommend a vitamin D supplementation. If you're not eating foods that are rich in vitamin D, which also includes salmon as well, so it's not just dairy, you have salmon, you have mushrooms are actually a rich source of vitamin D, and also dairy as well. If you're not able to get that regularly in your diet, I do recommend some sort of supplementation, ideally in the liquid form, as it's more absorbable in your body in liquid form than it is in pill form. And typically don't go over 2,000 IUs in your supplementation unless recommended by a medical professional. So that is all of my tips for you guys in both prevent that injury from actually happening and then how to focus in on your nutrition when injury does occur. So how you can bounce back better in your injury. So I see there are a few questions here, so I'll jump into those. The first question is, does the protein intake recommendation vary based on one's level of athleticism? Absolutely. So the more high performance you are, the higher the need. So if I would say that you are someone who's running anywhere from under 35 miles a week, that 1 gram per kilogram, 1 gram per body weight in pounds is a great recommendation. If you're running more than that 35 miles per week, then that would be a recommendation maybe closer to 1.2, 1.5 grams per pound of body weight. So it does increase as your mileage is increased. There's actually a recent study that showed it got even higher for some endurance athletes. So if we got some ultra runners in here, it does increase because your body can actually switch from the energy that it uses and it can start to use some protein. And if you're not consuming enough protein, it's going to start taking it from your muscle. So the increase in your protein in your diet spares your muscle from breaking down during a longer endurance activity. So yes, absolutely, it does vary based off of your athleticism. So that varies based off of time on your feet, basically. So great question. Second question, what is my take on dairy or gluten on inflammation? So this is a big one that is very much in the media. Dairy, depending on the individual, does not cause inflammation. And most of the commercial dairy may have some hormones. We have changed that oftentimes in our agricultural system. So many of them don't have hormones anymore. If you are concerned about dairy causing inflammation, first couple tips are, if you have no adverse effects, meaning no bloating, no gas, no diarrhea caused from dairy, it's probably not inflammatory for you. If you want to focus in on grass-fed dairy is going to be a less inflammatory type of dairy as well, more solidified for that. So I do not see dairy causing inflammation for many individuals. It's a great refuel option. Gluten can cause inflammation for some runners. This is a very common thing. You can create a gluten intolerance because of the constant stress of running can put on our bodies. So keeping that in mind, making sure if you want to eliminate some gluten from your diet, you can still get plenty of carbs. So gluten does not equal carbs. You can still get plenty of carbohydrates to support your running, to support your recovery, without necessarily having any gluten. Some common gluten-free, carb-rich foods are going to be quinoa, going to be some brown rice, some wild rice. Also looking at some oats. I'm a huge fan of oats and oatmeal, having those things. Very common things that you are going to be gluten-free. So if that's something you're concerned about causing any inflammation. Okay, we'll take this last question here before joining on over. How about lactose-free milk? Does that cause inflammation? It all depends on the individual. It will not cause inflammation as long as it's free of oftentimes like sugar alcohols. We do need to be cautious of those because sometimes that can cause inflammation in the gut, and we over time can cause inflammation. But I haven't seen too many lactose-free milks, depending on the brand, causing too many inflammatory responses. But like I said, if you're concerned about inflammation being caused by a food, the 3 things I just mentioned are the most common impacts you can tell if it's causing inflammation. Gas, bloating beyond a normal bloat, and diarrhea are the 3 big factors of seeing if something causes inflammation. So great questions, guys. I'm going to hand it on over to Jo, and she is going to lead us in a great presentation.
Thanks, Lydia. Okay, I don't know about the rest of you guys who are on here, but I feel like I've learned so much already. So thank you both for everything you've taught us so far. I've been like jotting notes down as we go, so hopefully you guys have too. I'm gonna share my screen again here, and we're gonna talk a little bit about the physical aspect. 1 second. There we go. So hopefully this is working. It's a very repetitive movement. And obviously a lot of factors go into preventing injury, but there's honestly a really big lack of knowledge about the non-running aspects of being a healthy runner. So what I mean by that is obviously how much you run, how intensely you run, your workouts, your training plan, all of that. Your actual running performance and training is one factor, but like we've already seen so far, there's so much more that goes into it. So there's preparation and recovery, and a lot of that is what we've just talked about. A lot of that falls under what Lydia just talked about. Also rest and sleep. Other aspects of running that can help you are strength training. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And musculoskeletal health. So that means your muscles, bones, your body systems that move you basically. So this includes bone health, joint mobility, range of motion, muscle health, and flexibility, which we'll also get into more in this talk here. Other factors to consider are cross-training and other factors. So a lot of what Shaheen spoke about, mental health, thought techniques, social aspects, whether that's a team or family support, support when you're injured, things like that. All of these affect our running and our injuries when we're running. So first we're going to talk about joint mobility. Joint mobility is specifically how the bones meet together and how those joints move. So when they're stiff, that's a reduction in mobility. If there's instability, that's like kind of excess mobility. It's not the same thing as flexibility, which is more the pliability of the muscles. So people often don't actually know what we mean by joint mobility, but it's a tiny movement that you would never actually see for the most part. It's the joint surfaces doing tiny movements on each other, and they're so important. Even though you can't see them, it's important to have healthy joint mobility. So we're gonna look right here at this, everything in this little picture right here, this foot. There are 26 bones, 33 joints, and over 100 muscles, ligaments, tendons, soft tissues like that in just this part of the picture right here, like right here. So we have to smash that up and down on the ground thousands of times when we run. So if we're ignoring our foot and ankle when we're talking about any kind of running related injury, then we're doing ourselves a big disservice. And honestly, it's not impossible. I've seen before somebody have hip pain, low back pain, and they've gotten better with therapy, but they're still kind of like plateaued and maybe not 100% better. And sometimes working on ankle mobility or something like that is what makes that last difference. So bottom line, we're not going to ignore the feet. Actually, common stiffnesses that people have in the feet are the big toe, so the center, that line that goes through the inner half of your foot, the first ray we call it. It has to take the entire body weight every time we walk or run. So if you have stiffness into extension of the big toe, or if you have instability in that first ray, both of those things are going to affect how your foot's able to land and then become rigid again to push you off. But that doesn't just affect like foot or shin injuries, that affects everything. Oftentimes it's connected to the hip, and that could be one way or another. That could mean that limitation in your toe makes you land a little bit differently each step, and then you get back pain. Or it could be that weakness in your hips is kind of what's causing there to be issues and excess strain through those joints in your feet. Okay, enough about the foot for right now. We'll come back to that later. The other thing where joint mobility is very big, and we're going to touch on later, is the spine. So we need enough spinal movement to be able to have healthy rotation while we run in our, especially our mid and upper back, the thoracic spine. Also, if you look at the picture here, what connects there? The ribs, which houses everything that's important to us in a cardiovascular, breathing, working kind of sense too. So our thoracic spine mobility is not only going to affect our running form, but even how we can breathe, even the effects of our diaphragm and all of our other breathing muscles. So in contrast to the joint mobility, flexibility is actually we're talking now about the muscles and tendons. It's their ability to stretch and contract at healthy lengths for muscle contraction. So studies show that muscle contracts best at its mid-length. If it's really tight or chronically shortened, it's going to be less efficient. If it's chronically lengthened, it's also going to be less efficient and not going to be able to give its full strength or power. So if we can do anything about that, we'd like to. So people often ask or tell me about stretching. Static stretching, when you're just kind of reaching and holding, is not always the best answer. And so mostly, if you think about when you're running, are you ever kind of holding a certain motion for 30 seconds and that's it? No, you're not. It's dynamic. You're moving. So why don't we practice like that, right? So we want to do stretching motions when we're moving and we're functionally lengthening those muscles in a way that they're actually going to be used. If we only just put things on stretch when they're not moving and then go out and do things moving at high speeds, that's part of what leads to injuries. So how we can do that is through eccentric or lengthening exercises and then adding load to that sometimes. So we'll move on here to strength training for runners. Number one tip is do it. It doesn't have to be like this left example in the bottom left corner here. You don't have to be, lifting really heavy Olympic weights, but you can. It won't harm your performance. So you can do that. And a lot of people like to do that as well. The only time it would detriment your performance in running is if you're doing too intense of that and not getting enough recovery before doing intense running. But if you look at a lot of elite runners, they're lifting heavy weights. So that's something that's okay to do with the appropriate progression. But when I'm talking about strength training, especially right now with COVID, unfortunately, we might not have access to gyms. We might not have access to tons of equipment and weights. And just anyway, it's fine to do strength training simple at home with body weight. So when I'm talking about strength training here, we're going to focus on a few areas. Core, pretty self-explanatory. We need our core to be strong in order to have a stable base from which to move our limbs. And then glutes. If you've been to other of my webinars, you've heard me talk about how glutes are the runner's best friend. I'll get into that more in a moment here, but glutes and legs is pretty self-explanatory here. Why would you want to do it? So sometimes people say, won't upper body training, arm strengthening, kind of take away from my running? On the contrary, it's actually necessary in some ways to have enough scapular and postural muscle strength, to stabilize during arm swing and kind of to assist us in an upright posture. You have to remember that you're also maintaining an upright posture the whole time you're running. So it is truly an all body activity. And so as runners, we should not be afraid to do strength training, whether it's at home without equipment, simple, whether it's through PT or training, or if you want to do heavier lifting in the gym safely, I think that's a good option for runners to do too. So we'll talk more specifically about the glutes here for just a moment. Gluteus medius and gluteus maximus are the bigger glute muscles here. So medius on the left here, it stabilizes us from side to side. So if you look at this, is what it does is it prevents this one, keeps us upright. And that's important because running is single leg all the time. So you're jumping from one single leg to the other single leg. So if we don't have this muscle functioning well, then it can cause problems all down the chain or up the chain. So like I talked about before, even at the toe. Glute max here is the big powerhouse. So why not use it? We've got to use our most powerful muscle. It propels us forward. So I'm all for training the gluteus maximus. And there are so many options for how to do that. Most kind of big lower body exercises are gonna combine that and train the glute max as well as other muscles at the same time. And that's fine. Some of them will target the glutes more, like a hip thrust will more than a back squat, which will more than a front squat, for example. But that is just generally any type of glute med and glute max strengthening is something that all runners should have, whether that's bands or weights or just body weight exercises. We should be doing this. All right, so a little bit about when we actually have injury. What do we do now? What kind of things should we be doing in the meantime? So for one thing, if you have a serious injury, then definitely see a doctor or a physical therapist. If you're having a pain that's kind of coming and going, and you have kind of a specific area, then do see a physical therapist because everybody is specific, you know? So we talked about like toe mobility, ankle mobility, hip strength, back mobility, all these things kind of function together. So a PT can kind of help you see the whole body and your specific areas where you can work on. But in the meantime, just tips for like, you feel like you might be getting injured, what do you do for now? So the answer partly depends on the type and severity of your injury. So for example, if we just say you have a mild muscle strain, a common mistake that a lot of people think I should stretch it again. So if you're just stretching it, that's actually counterproductive. You're kind of just like, oh, there's a minor tear in this muscle. I'm gonna just pull on it. That's not helpful actually. So research actually shows that light active exercise of that muscle, once the inflammation has calmed down, actually helps to increase the blood flow and to kind of start getting it healing better rather than just kind of stretching on it. So of course that's after inflammatory phase has passed if you have any type of swelling or anything like that. Other types of pain, bone pain, what I'm getting at here is like if you have shin splints or if you have something that's kind of a more localized type of pain, you know, if it's serious and ongoing, then see a doctor or see a PT, someone who can kind of point in the right direction, make sure it's not something serious. But if it is kind of more localized, if it's getting worse with your activity, like running, or if it's not improving, you should probably stop the aggravating activity for the time being because you don't want to mess with something like potential stress fracture, something like that. That's the type of injury that will get worse if you keep doing the aggravating activity or running. A lot of other aches and pains might not necessarily get worse, but if it is getting worse and not improving, that's the time that you kind of have a red light and you want to stop for now. So, anybody have questions so far here? Let me see. I'm gonna demonstrate a couple of exercises for these areas that we've talked about. So just a moment, I'm gonna bring you over and show you a couple exercises that you can have as a reference if you don't know where to start for these things. But in the meantime, I'm gonna check for questions in a minute here. But here are some resources for you. On our YouTube page at React, there are a lot of exercises in general, but there's a playlist called React Physical Therapy for Runners, and that has a couple of videos specific to like strength for runners or like warm-up exercises for runners and things like that. So that's something you can search for there. In a minute here, I will leave you with this screen at the end with all of our emails and things like that. But for now, we have a question here about gait training. So the question is, I understand physical therapists do gait training, but can they also do run training, learning and practicing the skill of running in order to be more efficient? Definitely. So in physical therapy practice, the most important thing is to be functional with what we do. So if you're having a problem doing some of your daily activities, we want to see you do that activity and, you know, pick out what's the issue with it and how are we going to make you able to do that again. So we definitely look at your running gait to begin with and kind of help you throughout the process of therapy to become more efficient of a runner. Any other questions here? Okay. So we're gonna do a couple of exercises here. If you wanna do them with me, you can, but I'm at least just going to demonstrate them so you have this as a tool. Again, this will all be recorded and you can reference back to it. So, first we're gonna start with some thoracic spine mobility. You're gonna go hands and knees here. I'm gonna put one hand behind my head. I'm gonna scoop under as far as I can this way. And then I'm gonna scoop up this way as far as I can, turning my gaze towards my elbow. And I'm gonna repeat that. You should try to go a little bit further each time. And then repeat on the other side as well. So I'm not demonstrating a full workout that I would do, but I would recommend doing 2 to 3 sets of 8 to 10 of those, and you will notice a difference as you go on, hopefully, of that feeling better and you being able to look further each time. So we've kind of mobilized our upper thoracic spine, our mid and upper back here, and now we're gonna do a little strengthening exercise for those muscles in our upper back. For this one, I'm using just a stretchy band, and this is a W sequence. So if you look at my setup, I'm a W with my arms. My palms are gonna face forward the whole time. I wanna have a little bit of tension on the band from the start, and I'm gonna pull my W back by pulling my shoulder blades together on my back. So I'm gonna pull a W back. Let's do 5 repetitions normal. And then we're gonna go into single arm. So you're gonna keep one arm steady, and the other arm is just gonna move, still in a W shape. After that, we're gonna alternate. So again, regular, single arm, and then alternating. And these are working some of our scapular and postural muscles on our back there. The next thing we're doing, we're gonna work those big glute and leg muscles here with a lunge matrix. So we're gonna do a forward lunge, a lateral lunge, and a reverse lunge. So this is working on not only all those muscles, but also some mobility, moving those joints in a different angle each time. If you want to make this even more challenging and even a little better for the running training, you can do it barefoot. It's going to be harder to balance, and that's going to make you use your foot muscles more. So speaking of foot muscles, the last 2 that I have here for you are focused on the foot and arch. So number 1, we're going to do calf raises against the wall. For this one, I'm going to have shoes off. Hopefully you can see there. So my position is going to be set up against the wall with a little bit of angle, kind of so I have more ankle mobility forward like this. I'm gonna do calf raises 3 different directions. Straight up and down. And then I'm gonna do them with my toes pointed just a little bit outward. And then I'm gonna do them with my toes pointed just a little bit inward. And this is working not only my calf muscles, also I should be going a little more slowly on the way down to work that eccentric phase. It's not only working my calf muscles, we're also working on this big toe mobility here and ankle mobility. So that's a good comprehensive exercise there. And the last one, I'm gonna give you guys a little foot view, and we're gonna do arch raises. So this is not easy, but it's very important. And I challenge you all to try this. You can do this just at home. All you need to do is not have a shoe on. I challenge you to try these arch raises here. So all you're gonna do is stand with most of your weight, all of your weight on one foot. The other one's gonna be there for balance though. You can hold on if you need to something. But I'm gonna raise this arch, looking at my right foot here. I'm gonna just raise the arch of that foot by kind of imagining that I'm pulling my ball of my foot and my heel together to pull on the floor. And you can barely see, but you should be able to see some raising of my arch here. Try to hold this for a couple seconds each time. And also try to make sure that you're not scrunching and just pulling with your toes too much. You shouldn't actually see any movement of your toes really. So try to keep the toes relaxed there. Okay. So those are just some tips for you at home. Like I said, without seeing a specific person, we can't know exactly where your personal deficits are, where your strengths and weaknesses are, but these are a place to start. So maybe if it can't really hurt, try out some toe and arch exercises for a little change, put it into your regular workout routine. Okay, that's all from me today. I just want to say a huge thank you to Shaheen and Lydia. I know that I've learned so much, and this has been amazing for me to see and kind of hear about the other aspects that are so important to injury recovery, whether it's fueling your body for recovery, just like you would fuel your body for working out, and then also setting yourself up mentally for success, and using your resources, your social resources, your mental, psychological resources in your recovery process as well. So I hope you guys have all gotten a lot of help out of this as well. Please give us feedback, and if you have any more questions, please sneak them in right now before we leave. I'm pulling up for you. Here we have contact information for all 3 of us. Send an email. Yes. All right. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great night.